Detroit. February 14th, 1976. The smoke rising to the ceiling of Cobo Hall, mixed with the screams of 50,000 people. In the center of the stage stood a man in silver makeup, and in his hands, his Les Paul Custom was engulfed in flames. But Space Ace didn't stop. He kept playing. Because in that moment, this wasn't just a concert performance, this was rock history being written. But nobody knew that behind those stage lights, in Ace Frehley's mind, there was a far more dangerous fire burning. And what would happen in the next 12 minutes would forever change both Kiss's future and one man's destiny. Backstage, Gene Simmons stood frozen, watching. The expression on Paul Stanley's face flickered between fear and admiration. As Peter Criss's drum solo continued, the entire arena held its breath. Because everyone could see it, Space Ace's guitar was actually on fire. And he continued playing the final riffs of Detroit Rock City as if nothing was wrong. But the truth was, what happened that night at Cobo Hall wasn't just a stage accident. It was a metaphor for Ace Frehley's relationship with himself, with his band, and with the entire rock world. And the story was far darker than anyone imagined. Thousands among the crowd. Subscribe now. If you lived through that era, you know what Kiss concerts meant. It wasn't just music. It was an experience. A ritual. When you walked through those arena doors, you left your everyday life outside. The place you entered was another world, filled with pyrotechnic smoke, ear-shattering amplifier roar, and the synchronized heartbeats of tens of thousands. And that world had four gods: Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Peter Criss, and of course Space Ace, Ace Frehley. In early 1976, Kiss was at the peak of rock music. The Destroyer album was breaking records worldwide. Shouted Out Loud and Detroit Rock City played non-stop on radio stations. Every concert sold out instantly. Tickets gone months in advance. But behind those bright makeup designs, those silver costumes, those flame-throwing stages, there was a truth nobody saw. Ace Frehley had just turned 30 that year. Paul Daniel Frehley, who came from the Bronx, from a working-class family, was now world-famous as Space Ace. But that fame came with a price. Every night the same makeup, every night the same costume, every night the same show, every night the same persona. Space Ace, cold, mysterious, from outer space, not human. And with each passing day, Ace was losing himself a little more, melting into Space Ace, drifting further from his real identity. That night, in Detroit, on February 14th, at Cobo Hall, the incident that would unfold would be a physical manifestation of this identity crisis. Because when Ace's guitar burned, it was actually the external expression of the fire burning inside Ace. But back then, nobody knew. Everyone just wanted the show to continue. 8:30. The arena went dark. The crowd's anticipation-filled screams were deafening. And then, that familiar intro. Dum dum dum. The opening notes of Detroit Rock City. Stage lights suddenly blazed. Smoke machines fired, and Kiss took the stage. Gene Simmons from the right, Paul Stanley from the left, Peter Criss in back at the drums, and Ace Frehley, Space Ace, center stage in his silver costume, silver makeup, Les Paul in hand. The crowd went wild. 50,000 people screaming, jumping, waving simultaneously. This was the pinnacle of rock music. This was Kiss's power, and at the very center of that power stood Ace Frehley. The song began. Ace's fingers danced across the strings. Every note perfect, every riff iconic. Space Ace mode engaged. But something was different. Ace stood closer to the center pyrotechnic units than usual. Normally, during Gene's bass solo, Ace moved right, Paul stayed left, distance between the two guitarists. But tonight, Ace didn't move from his spot, as if a magnet pulled him to that point, as if unconsciously he was putting himself in danger. One of the roadies, standing stage side, watched anxiously, because he knew those pyrotechnic units fired automatically at program times. And right now, Ace stood exactly where the blast would occur. Detroit Rock City ended. Applause rose. Paul approached the microphone. "Detroit, how are you doing?" The crowd roared. "Tonight we're here just for you, and we're going to show you the best part of our show." Gene raised his bass, greeting everyone with his characteristic tongue. Peter did a drum intro, and then the next song, Shouted Out Loud. This song was Kiss's anthem. In this song, stage effects hit maximum. Laser beams, smoke bombs, and of course pyrotechnics. Ace adjusted his guitar position. The Les Paul connected to Marshall amps. The sound deafening, and the song began. When the first chorus hit, fireballs shot from both sides of the stage. The crowd screamed. Paul held the microphone, scanning the arena as he sang. Gene raised his bass high. Peter's drumsticks moved rapidly up and down, and Ace played, as Space Ace, eyes closed, lost in the music, and right then, the second pyrotechnic blast came. Closer this time, stronger, and something went wrong. Because someone on the technical crew miscalculated the timing, the blast came 2 seconds early, and Ace stood right there. 8:30. The arena went dark. The crowd's anticipation-filled screams were deafening. And then, that familiar intro. Dum dum dum. The opening notes of Detroit Rock City. Stage lights suddenly blazed. Smoke machines fired, and Kiss took the stage. Gene Simmons from the right, Paul Stanley from the left, Peter Criss in back at the drums, and Ace Frehley, Space Ace, center stage in his silver costume, silver makeup, Les Paul in hand. The crowd went wild. 50,000 people screaming, jumping, waving simultaneously. This was the pinnacle of rock music. This was Kiss's power. And at the very center of that power stood Ace Frehley. The song began. Ace's fingers danced across the strings. Every note perfect, every riff iconic. Space Ace mode engaged. But something was different. Ace stood closer to the center pyrotechnic units than usual. Normally during Gene's bass solo, Ace moved right, Paul stayed left. Distance between the two guitarists. But tonight, Ace didn't move from his spot, as if a magnet pulled him to that point, as if unconsciously, he was putting himself in danger. One of the roadies, standing stage side, watched anxiously. Because he knew, those pyrotechnic units fired automatically at programmed times, and right now, Ace stood exactly where the blast would occur. Detroit Rock City ended. Applause rose. Paul approached the microphone. "Detroit, how are you doing?" The crowd roared. "Tonight, we're here just for you, and we're going to show you the best part of our show." Gene raised his bass, greeting everyone with his characteristic tongue. Peter did a drum intro, and then the next song, shouted out loud. This song was Kiss's anthem. In this song, stage effects hit maximum. Laser beams, smoke bombs, and of course, pyrotechnics. Ace adjusted his guitar position. The Les Paul connected to Marshall amps. The sound deafening, and the song began. When the first chorus hit, fireballs shot from both sides of the stage. The crowd screamed. Paul held the microphone, scanning the arena as he sang. Gene raised his bass high. Peter's drumsticks moved rapidly up and down. And Ace played, as Space Ace, eyes closed, lost in the music. And right then, the second pyrotechnic blast came. Closer this time, stronger, and something went wrong. Because someone on the technical crew miscalculated the timing. The blast came 2 seconds early, and Ace stood right there. The explosion happened. A massive fireball shot from the center of the stage. The heat wave reached the first 3 rows of spectators, and Ace's Les Paul stood right in front of that fireball. Within 1 second, the guitar's lacquered surface ignited. Small at first, just a spark, but then the flame spread rapidly. The guitar's body, that beautiful silver-finished surface, began to burn. Roadies started running toward the stage in panic. The technical director yelled into his headset, "Cut the pyrotechnics, cut them now." But the stage noise was so loud nobody could hear anyone. The crowd at first didn't understand what was happening. Because Kiss shows always had fire, smoke, effects. Maybe this was part of the show? But a 10-year-old kid standing at the edge of the stage tugged his father's arm and shouted, "Dad, look, that guy's guitar is really burning." And but no notes came. In that moment, Ace looked down and saw the truth. His Les Paul engulfed in flames, smoke rising, heat reaching his hands. And strangely, the first thought through Ace's mind was this: finally there's a physical fire. Now I can explain the fire inside me. This thought lasted 1 second, but that 1 second felt like eternity. Because in that 1 second, Ace Frehley made a decision. That guitar could burn. The costume could burn. The makeup could melt. But the music couldn't stop. Because music was the only real thing. Music was Space Ace's voice, behind the makeup, inside the costume, the real Ace Frehley's voice. And then Ace did something that shocked everyone. He didn't lower the burning guitar, didn't throw it to the ground, didn't wait for roadie assistance. Instead, with his left hand he gripped the guitar's neck tightly, the part away from the flames, and with his right hand continued playing across the strings. Shouted out loud solo section. That iconic wah-wah pedal-driven space shooting solo. Ace played with a burning guitar, stage lights on him, smoke, flames, music, all together. And 50,000 people at Cobo Hall witnessed it. History. Because that moment wasn't just a concert performance. It was one man's moment of confronting his inner fire. It was Ace Frehley's statement to the Space Ace character, to Kiss, to the entire world. "I am here, I burn, but I don't stop." Paul Stanley, From the other end of the stage, watched in shock, Gene Simmons lowered his bass, staring directly at Ace. Peter Criss slowed his drumsticks, tempo dropping but not stopping completely, because all three understood, if they stopped now, panic would ensue, the crowd would panic, things would spiral out of control. But if they continued, if Ace kept playing, maybe this would just look like part of the show, maybe nobody would notice. His fingertips reddened from the heat, the guitar's string sections slightly warped from the temperature, but Ace finished that solo. The final note came, and right then 2 roadies burst onto the stage. One carried a fire extinguisher, the other brought a backup guitar. Fire extinguisher foam sprayed over the Les Paul. Flames extinguished. But the damage was irreversible. The guitar's body turned black. Lacquer bubbled, melted. Pickups deformed from heat. Strings reached breaking point. That beautiful silver surface gone. Ace released the guitar and took the backup, a Gibson SG. Not the same sound, not the same feel, but the show must go on. Paul turned to the microphone. Detroit. Nothing can stop Kiss. The crowd applauded wildly. Gene raised his bass again. Peter did a drum intro, and the next song began. Cold Gin. Ace's song. Sung with Ace's voice, played with Ace's guitar. But tonight, that guitar burned, his hands had foam stains, and his soul was elsewhere. The concert continued. Rock and roll all night. Black Diamond. Deuce. Every classic played. The crowd went crazy. But behind the stage, the technical crew panicked. A serious error in the pyrotechnic system. If this error repeated, not just guitars but people could burn. The tour manager yelled to Gene through the headset. "Gene, we need to shut down pyrotechnics. It's dangerous." Gene shot back. "No, the show goes on. We must have pyrotechnics for the finale. The audience expects it." Tour manager, "But Ace's guitar burned. Someone could get hurt." Gene's response, cold and clear. "Ace is fine. The guitar burned, he didn't. Nothing stops until the show ends." This conversation would later become legendary backstage. Because that conversation summarized Kiss's philosophy. The show is more important than everything. Music is more important than individuals. Brand is more important than people. And Ace, sitting backstage looking at his burned guitar, understood this. This is why that guitar burned. This is why the fire inside him couldn't be extinguished. Because he was a machine, a brand, a persona. Space Ace. And Paul Daniel Frehley was disappearing a little more each day. The finale approached. Rock and roll all night. The night's final song. 50,000 people in the arena sang the chorus together. I want to rock and roll all night and party every day. The sound ear-splitting. Energy at maximum. And backstage, pyrotechnic crews made final preparations. Because in the finale, all systems would fire simultaneously. Flames, smoke, lasers, everything together. This was Kiss's signature. This was what audiences expected. But backstage, that burned Les Paul still sat there. One of the roadies had placed the guitar in a flight case, set it aside, but the guitar, even absent, made its presence felt. Because that guitar wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a symbol of Ace Frehley's own fire. The final chorus came. Paul, Gene, and Peter walked toward the front of the stage. Ace stayed back, SG guitar in hand, but his mind elsewhere. Because in that moment, Ace realized something. What happens after this concert ends? For the next concert, he'd get a new guitar. For the next album, he'd write new songs. For the next tour, he'd wear the Space Ace costume again, apply that makeup again, play that persona again. And each time, a little more of Ace Frehley would disappear. A little more of Space Ace would remain. Until one day, only the makeup remained. Only the costume remained. Only a hologram remained. The final explosion came. All pyrotechnic systems fired simultaneously. Massive fireballs shot from every point on the stage. Smoke filled the arena. Laser beams scattered in all directions. And Kiss's 4 members at the front of the stage, arms raised, struck the final pose. Photographers clicked. Cameras rolled. Spectators screamed. This was the perfect finale. This was Kiss's power. But behind Ace's eyes, something else existed. Exhaustion, depletion, and deep, very deep loneliness. Because he understood. This success, this fame, this applause, it was all for Space Ace, not for Paul Daniel Frehley. Stage lights went dark. The crowd still applauding, still shouting, still demanding an encore. But Kiss left the stage. 4 masked figures walked behind the stage, passed through the corridor, reached the dressing rooms. And when the door closed, outside noise cut off. Inside, silence. Only the breathing sounds of 4 men. Gene removed his mask. Great show. A little problem, but we handled it. Paul started undoing his costume. Ace, you're okay, right? Ace didn't respond, just sat there, set the SG guitar on the floor, stared at his hands. His fingertips reddened. Slight burn smell. Peter came over to Ace, touched his shoulder. Hey man, you okay? Ace raised his head. In his eyes, something, an emptiness, a silent scream. But he didn't say it out loud, just nodded. I'm fine. But he wasn't fine. That night at Cobo Hall, in front of 50,000 people, Ace Frehley lost something. And that thing wasn't just a guitar, it was a piece of himself. Because that Les Paul was Ace's soul, story, identity. And when that guitar burned, something inside Ace burned too. A hope, a dream, a belief. Maybe one day, without being Space Ace, just as Ace, he could stand on stage. But that night, that possibility burned too. And only ashes remained. February 15th morning. Hotel room in Detroit. Ace woke up, head aching, hands still hurting, sat on the bed's edge, opened the curtains. Outside, snow falling. Detroit, cold and gray. In the corner of the room, last night's costume hung. Silver spandex, that magnificent costume that sparkled under stage lights, now looked like just a pile of fabric. Makeup kit by the sink. Inside that silver makeup, black pencil, the entire Space Ace identity. But Ace wasn't looking. Because he didn't want to look. Because he didn't want to see that character anymore. Phone rang. Ace picked up the receiver. Tour manager. Ace, how are you? Were you okay last night? Did anything happen to your hands? Ace, I'm fine. A silence. Then the tour manager. They took your burned guitar. Can't be repaired. But Casablanca Records is sending you a new Les Paul. Actually 2. Good ones. No problem. Ace didn't respond. Because the tour manager didn't understand. A new guitar couldn't replace the old one. Because that guitar wasn't just an instrument. It was memories, feeling, connection. But Ace didn't explain. Because even if he explained, nobody would understand. Because what mattered to them was the show, the brand, selling the future. Then a knock at the door. Ace opened it. Peter Criss stood in the hallway, holding 2 coffees. Hey man, can we talk? Ace nodded. Yes. Peter came in, closed the door. Both sat quietly, sipped their coffee. Then Peter spoke. Last night, I was scared. For you. When that guitar caught fire, I got. Ace. You could have burned. Ace shrugged. I didn't burn. Peter continued. But what if you had? Gene would have wanted the show to continue. Paul would have wanted the audience not to suspect. You'd just be Space Ace. A character. Replaceable. These words stabbed into Ace. Because they were true. Because they were real. Peter met Ace's gaze. You know, sometimes I think, this band is going to swallow us. We'll just be makeup-wearing puppets. And one day, we'll forget our real faces. Ace nodded. We're already forgetting, Peter. We're already forgetting. 2 men sat there, snow falling outside the window, and looking from inside, 2 rock stars could be seen. But in reality, there were 2 tired, exhausted, lonely men. 2 men searching for their own identities. May 1976. Electric Lady Studios. Kiss recording for a new album. Rock and Roll Over would be the album's name. Ace sat in the studio corner with his new Les Paul. The guitar, flawless. Factory fresh. No scratches, no wear, no story. Ace tried a riff on the strings. Then stopped. Started again. Stopped again. Something was wrong. Sound correct. Technique correct. But no feeling. Because that feeling left with the burned guitar. The recording engineer spoke into the headphones. Ace, ready? You need to record your guitar part for Hard Luck Woman. Ace nodded yes. Put on the headphones. Music started. Paul's vocal track, Peter's drum track, Gene's bass track, and Ace's turn. But when he started playing, his fingers' movements were mechanical. No soul. On the other side of the studio, Gene and Paul listened in the control room. Gene, something's wrong. Ace's playing is cold. Paul, he's been like this since Detroit. That fire affected him. Gene shrugged. He'll get used to it. We all got used to it. But Ace wasn't getting used to it. Because that fire didn't just burn a guitar. That fire also extinguished the last spark of hope inside Ace. After that fire, Ace understood. In Kiss, not individuals but the brand mattered. In Kiss, not people but characters mattered. And if one day Ace Frehley tired of being Space Ace, Kiss would find someone else. Another guitarist would come, apply Space Ace makeup, wear that costume, play that persona, and nobody would notice. Because what mattered wasn't Ace Frehley. What mattered was Space Ace, and Ace now accepted this. But acceptance hurt. 1978. Ace Frehley sat in his own home in Connecticut, a notebook in hand. Inside, lyrics, riffs, melody ideas, Kiss decided each member would make a solo album. 4 albums releasing the same day. Casablanca Records' big marketing move. But for Ace, this was different. This was an opportunity. Because in the solo album, no Space Ace, no makeup, no costume, only Ace Frehley, only music. And maybe then the world would see the real Ace Frehley. The solo album released. September 1978. And a miracle happened. Ace Frehley's solo album sold more than the other Kiss members' albums. New York Groove entered Billboard Hot 100. Radio stations played it. MTV, not yet existing but radio, very powerful format, supported it. And Ace understood something. People loved not Space Ace, but Ace Frehley. One-hit wonder. These words killed Ace's soul. Because he knew the solo album was proof of his real talent. But in Kiss, real talent didn't matter. In Kiss, what mattered was keeping the machine running. 1982. Ace Frehley made a decision. He'd leave Kiss because he couldn't take it anymore. Because he didn't want to be Space Ace anymore. Because he wanted to make his own music. He told the band, Gene, angry. You're a fool, Ace. Without Kiss, you're nothing. Paul, disappointed. We're a family. You're abandoning the family. Peter, silent. Because he knew soon his turn would come. But Ace was determined, because he'd known since that Detroit fire, if he continued staying, not just his guitar, but he himself would burn. December 15, 1982, Madison Square Garden, Ace's last concert with Kiss. But that night neither fans nor press knew it. The concert started like a normal concert. Detroit Rock City. Shouted out loud. Cold gin, every song played. But Ace felt a farewell in every note, an ending in every riff. And when the concert ended, as Ace left the stage, he turned around for one last look. At that stage, at that crowd, at that makeup, at that costume, and thought to himself, goodbye Space Ace, you were my creation, but now, I won't be you. Now I'll be Ace Frehley. 2025. Ace Frehley, 74 years old, sitting in his Connecticut home, pictures hanging on the wall. Young Ace, on stage with Kiss, Destroyer era. A live album cover. And one more picture. The burned Les Paul. A fan photograph that night. The guitar in flames. The moment Ace kept playing. That photo later became legendary. Collectors paid thousands of dollars for copies of that photo. But for Ace, that photo represented something else. The price of ignoring his own inner fire. Ace was asked in an interview, that night in Detroit, why didn't you throw the guitar down? Why did you keep playing? Ace smiled. Because in that moment I didn't understand. That guitar burning was me burning. That guitar's destruction was my identity's destruction. But I'd become so accustomed to being Space Ace that I couldn't see the real Ace. When that guitar burned, it was actually giving me a message. Stop now. Find yourself now. But I only understood that message years later. The interviewer continued. Do you have regrets about leaving Kiss? Ace thought, then answered, no, because if I hadn't left, I wouldn't be here today. Today I wouldn't be a musician making my own music, known by my own name. Kiss gave me a lot. Fame, money, experience. But Kiss also took a lot from me. My identity, my freedom. And that fire reminded me, if you don't control your own fire, that fire controls you. Where is that burned Les Paul today? Some say it was thrown in the trash. Some say it sits in Ace's house basement. Others say it's somewhere in Casablanca Records' archives. But the truth is that guitar's physical location doesn't matter. Because that guitar became a symbol. In rock music history, that guitar represents the price of art, the dark side of fame, the struggle to preserve identity. Ace Frehley used dozens more guitars throughout the rest of his life. Les Paul, Stratocasters, custom-built guitars. But none were as meaningful as that burned Les Paul. Because that guitar taught Ace a lesson. Music is more powerful than the instrument. Identity is more important than persona. And real success isn't how others see you, but how you see yourself. Detroit, February 14, 1976. That night at Cobo Hall, 50,000 people witnessed a concert. But simultaneously, they witnessed one man confronting the fire within himself. That man was Ace Frehley. And that fire was both an ending and a beginning, because that fire destroyed Space Ace. But at the same time, it birthed the real Ace Frehley. And today, at 74, Ace remembers that night and smiles. Because he knows, sometimes you need to burn. Sometimes you need to lose everything. Because only then can you find who you really are. And when you find that truth, no fire can destroy you. Because you're no longer the flame, you're the force controlling that flame. You're Ace Frehley, not Space Ace, just Ace. And that's enough. That was always enough.